Boom, 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 boom. Fern?
You are definitely not a drummer.
Oh, you'd be surprised. You would be surprised.
I would actually.
Yeah, so would I. I'm not a drummer. But you can imagine what it'd be like if I were a drummer. Today, hey, Fern, all I ask for today is one thing. Stay on topic. You are the one of the two of us that tends to get off the rails. People talk about it. People say, hey, Ackerman runs the straight and narrow. Fern, tangents, digressions. And today I need you to stay on topic because we got a lot to cover. We're back here.
Is that why you listen, I don't need to be scolded by the guy who just shifts his office from basement to basement to basement.
Hey, okay. This is a nice basement. Yes, for those wondering what's going on, we are in our new house. So still a mess right here, but don't worry. My loyal companion, where is he? There's Rocky sleeping. We got a lot to just a few pages, Nikki Sharp says. That's Fern's big problem, Nick. So we've got just a few pages. By the way, Fern, can I tell you something before we get into this?
I don't feel that I have an option, so let's just get this over with.
Yeah, you didn't. You didn't have an option, but I want to tell you about the development of some of our affiliate U clients in our professional development curriculum, because Nikki Sharp is crushing it. Every week she's dropping videos. Here's what I tell the people on those calls. And if you want to be a better coach, for one, make sure your affiliate owner signs up for Affiliate University. But here's what it's all about. You're going to get feedback. And Fern, the flow master, knows this very well. It's not about the feedback you get. It's about how well you implement said feedback moving forward. And Nikki Sharp, week after week, I'm like, hey, you got to do this. Now, there's been a couple of missteps on her iPhone, right? She's not the gadget nerd she claims to be. She films vertically. Big faux pas. It's a little blurry, but she's developing as a coach, let me tell you. And yeah, well, Ryan, I almost took this call in the closet, by the way, circa 2019. Yeah, I was going to say,
she's developing as a coach, not because of you, but despite you. So well done, Nikki Sharp. Yeah.
Despite me. So more than excited for this, taking my L1 in the spring. Awesome stuff. Elise, where are you taking it? Let us know in the comments. Let's dig into this. We got like 11, 12 pages to cover.
Hey, well, I can recite most of it, so it'll be fine.
Yeah, you mean I'm gonna say this, and for those of you that watch live, by the way, we're live every Wednesday, 4 p.m. Eastern. Those of you that watched live last week, I think it was pretty obvious. Fern knows his shit. Fern, you know your shit. I came out of that, I was like, damn,
that was better than me.
He's been a lot better than me. Hence the flow master, Fern. Cool. Cookville. Maybe Fern will be there. You gonna be in Cookville now?
When?
In the spring? Well, when you wouldn't be scheduled yet.
Not yet. I mean, I'm very possible. Yeah, very, very possibly.
So let's dig in. I've been really enjoying just reviewing this myself, and we said it last week, but I'll say it again. If you are intending to take your level 3 or your level 2 or 1, like Elise here, this is where this is it. This is like, here are the answers. Here is gold when it comes to learning and understanding CrossFit.
For the purposes of ANSI accreditation, that's not what we're saying is we're giving you the answers. But if you if you want to make sitting for the level 1 or the level 2 or the level 3 something that's not overwhelmingly nerve-wracking, it's to actually learn the content. So, this will be a recurring theme as we work through this. There's a difference between being exposed to the content versus like actually learning the content. And what we're hoping is that this series will do far more than expose you to the content. We're like unpacking a lot of these concepts at a pretty deep level here, and to help you start to connect the dots. So it's not just like, okay, I understand the definition of or the definition of fitness, or the definition of CrossFit. That's not going to suffice. Particularly if you're going to sit for your level 3, like you need to understand these concepts at a pretty significant level in how they practically apply inside of the affiliate.
Absolutely. Let's dig in. Cody, slap on that fitness in 100 words, would you? And here's why I want Cody to put that on there. As I was reading through Foundations, I very quickly kind of saw where fitness in 100 words came from. You know, as we break this down, I think Glassman kind of touched upon each of these little things, and then ultimately, you know, shortly thereafter, wrote fitness in 100 words. And of course, that will also be in the What is Fitness chapters that we break down. By the way, special guest on those, Pat Barber from Warm Up and Workouts, is hopping on there.
So, well, here, pull that back up, Cody, and then either Jay, you can read it, or I can read it. Doesn't matter.
All right, let's do it. Eat meat and vegetables, nuts and seeds, some fruit, little starch, and no sugar. Keep intake to levels that will support exercise but not body fat. Practice and train major lifts, deadlift, clean, squat, presses, clean and jerk, and snatch. Similarly, master the basics of gymnastics, pull-ups, dips, rope climb, push-ups, sit-ups, presses to handstand, pirouettes, flips, splits, and holds, bike, run, swim, row, etc. Hard and fast. 5 or 6 days per week. Mix these elements in as many combinations and patterns as creativity will allow. Routine is the enemy. Keep workouts short and intense regularly. Learn and play new sports.
So this is, I mean, he's taken so many things out of the level 1 experience, or the kernel as it's referred to, and condensed them down into that paragraph, which is kind of wild. The simplicity of that paragraph and what it conveys is pretty profound, if we're going to be very honest with you. And I know people are like, oh, whatever. I'm like, it is like, that is the answer to most woes. And I don't care what people say about it, but it's just like, they want to overcomplicate it, be like, well, everybody's a little bit unique. And I'm like, well, that wasn't specific. And that's the beauty of it, you know, because you could apply that even if done poorly, it would reap all the benefits that we already know, and why most fitness kind of companies, if you will, or even methodologies and air quotes, I don't even know what that means, but like have to some degree copied that model.
A couple of months ago, CrossFit put fitness in 100 words up on their social media, and people lost their minds. People were really getting, and I think the strangest part of that was they were acting like CrossFit just wrote that. Like, hey, this has been around for 20 years.
Yeah, again, going back to what we stated in the previous show, which is like, at some point as a community, we can hold two thoughts at once, which is like, hey, we're avid CrossFitters, but we could also acknowledge that, like, collectively, there's probably a level of ignorance floating around in the coaching and the affiliate owner space that should probably be addressed. And again, not bad, but let's talk about it. And that's kind of the purpose of this whole thing. But that statement, I mean, it covers what is CrossFit, it covers what is fit, it covers virtually all of the theory lectures. So you have what is CrossFit, what is fitness, you have technique, programming, and nutrition. Or those are the 5 what we would describe as theory lectures inside of the level 1 weekend that you would hear over the course of 2 days. And all of them are to some extent addressed inside of that statement, as well as, you know, a handful of other things. But I think it's worth kind of diving into is, like, again, going back to a little bit, if we read into the, what is that, page 5 of 255 on the manual, and we like the first page of Foundations. Yeah, we're just like, that's an old picture too, by the way. I'd love to know who that is with regard to that double overhead squat.
I thought
that double kettlebell overhead squat.
Well, it's not who I thought it was, actually. You judged that dude at the games, Travis Mayer. But it's not him, because this is old.
Dude, this is from 2000.
Yeah. But it does look a little like Travis Mayer, right?
Early in the game. I don't think he has brass knuckles on his ribcage.
It's not Brian Boucher, that's for sure.
And he's wearing do-wins. But anyway.
Remember those back in the day?
So let's start here real quick. And so CrossFit is a core strength and conditioning program. We've designed our program to elicit as broad and adaptational response as possible. Again, that was the intent. CrossFit is not a specialized fitness program, but a deliberate attempt to optimize physical competence in each of the 10 general of the 10 fitness domains. They are, well, and again, this is what we refer to as Model 1 inside the What is Fitness lecture, right? So there's 4 models in there that give the definition of fitness. The 10 general physical skills is model 1. And if we unpack those real quick, it goes cardiorespiratory endurance, strength, stamina, flexibility, speed, power, coordination, accuracy, agility, and balance, right? And listed in that order. And I recommend if you're studying for the test that you list them in that order, because this allows you to keep it clean with regard to why the 10 general physical skills are what they are. And again, give credit where credit is due. That's not CrossFit's list. Bruce Evans and Jim Cawley from Dynamax came up with that list. And again, same thing we say in there is like, we do find it to be all inclusive. But the important about that is those are the 10 general physical skills. And what we would say is deficiency in any one of those would lead to, a potential scenario where you have loss of game, mission, or life, right? And the whole point of that is wherever your deficiency lies as a human being, you should start there. But this is a little bit more specific way to address that. No different than we would in the affiliate when we're talking about, hey, here's the kind of the 10 general physical attributes of an affiliate. Where do you suffer the most? Because we give lectures on that too. Same thing here. It makes it easy to identify that if you're super strong, you probably have less than ideal cardiorespiratory endurance, right? Just knowing what we know about compromise, right? If I want to go all the way to the end of the spectrum on strength, you're going to forfeit something else. So what he's referring to there is the first model. And when we're talking about that, remember the idea there is a balance of all 10 of those, right? Or what he would describe as like physiological adaptations, right? If we want to be fit, we need to be balanced across all 10 of those. The end.
So
right?
Absolutely. We need to work through those. And like you said, most people have a weakness. They prefer to work on what they're good at. But if we attack that weakness, we talk about this in What is Fitness in the Hopper portion. There's more to be gained by attacking your weakness headlong than by focusing on your strength. Right. So let's scroll down a little bit. Let's go to an effective approach. So for those of you following along, page 6, an effective approach. And I think this is really fascinating that we've kind of called out all the Globo gyms out there back in 2002. I mean, this was pre-CrossFit Games. This was hey, we know this works. We know people are making gains. This was just like, what you're doing doesn't work, but what we do is and will work.
Well, so kind of bleeding the previous paragraph here and this one with regard. So if we're talking about effective approach, it says in gyms and health clubs throughout the world, the typical workout consists of isolation movements and extended aerobic sessions, right? So that goes back to what we said earlier. So it's like nothing wrong with isolation movements. They shouldn't be the meat of your program, right? They should be accessory based or something that, you just kind of do to enhance the core functional compound movements. Fitness community from trainers to magazines as exercising public believing that lateral raises, curls, leg extensions, sit-ups, and light combined with the 20 to 40 minute stints on a stationary bike or treadmill are going to lead someone to some kind of great fitness. And now that's what they thought because nobody had ever done anything before, right? So it's just like, okay, ignorance is bliss, but we all kind of know otherwise now because you can't develop that level of fitness any other way that we're aware of, right? To be that well balanced across so many different things. And I think what's important to understand here is a lot of the criticism is, hey, you're never going to be great at anything. And I would actually push back on that. The timeline has to be adjusted here, right? Most people are thinking about, hey, you're never going to be really strong. And like, if we're talking about like peak end, like deadlift 1,000 pounds, no, you're never going to be the strongest person on earth. But I think we should calibrate the discussion about strong. If you could deadlift 500 pounds, like you're strong. Shit, if you can deadlift 400 pounds, you're strong. And you can do that. But more importantly, with this idea of taking the 10 general physical skills, applying some degree of variance, this effective approach, what it allows for, which we're all recipients of, by the way, if you've been CrossFitting for as long as many of us have, like more than a decade, and still continue to see benefits, is their trajectory is longer and lower. but you will continue to see improvements across all 10 over that period of time. It allows, to some degree, exactly what we talk about in the fitness lecture, the What is Fitness lecture. Like, the limiting factor is going to be age in your progression. It's not going to be capacity. Like, you would continue to see progression in capacity for an extended period of time, like meaning decades in some sense. And you're not going to see that in a lot of other places, or many other places at all. Like, you would peak well inside that single modality, and you would be fighting for 1 to 2% improvement after a pretty short amount of time. Whereas this is just like, I still have plenty of room of improvement. And I think that's the beauty of all of this. And what he's stating here is it just reframes what is effective and what that should look like. And when you're talking about decades now you're talking about going back to world-class fitness on 100 words. And like, this is lifestyle. It's not a training program. It's a lifestyle.
And I think for a lot of people, they try to get too good too fast, right? But think about this. If you put, let's call it a very low number in my estimation, 20 pounds on all of your lifts every year. In 10 years from now, you've added 200 pounds. That's insane.
Wow.
You know, and that's not going to happen maybe for the snatch or the press, but certainly for your back squat, certainly for your deadlift, right? So like you're saying, it's your lifestyle. It's making sure we're doing this in 10, 20, 30 years. I think everyone currently watching, that should be your goal. Like, I want to be able to do this in 20 years from now. I want to keep doing CrossFit. Hey, Cody, will you pull up Nick's question? What makes some of the 10 general physical skills organic versus neurological, and what do you call the ones that overlap? Well, to answer the latter part, there's no necessarily title for the ones that overlap.
Yeah,
we just
just
say
both.
they're both. And, you know, like Fern said earlier, power, speed. So there's two good examples for that. I think you could take a short distance sprint or the snatch. And then, right, you take the snatch. You need power, you need speed. But if you only worked on the organic, right, and when you say what's the difference, the organic ones, we're seeing change on a cellular level. If we were to take a slice of muscle tissue, we would see improvement in that slice under a microscope. But if you take the organic skills only, flexibility, cardiorespiratory endurance, strength and stamina, and only focused on those, would your snatch go up? Yeah, probably. If you got a little stronger, for sure. And contrary to that, if you took balance, accuracy, agility, and coordination and only worked on those, foot position, you know, where you receive the barbell, would your snatch go up? Probably. But the magic is in working both ends of those, the organic and the neurological.
Another kind of clarifying thing, because this question does come up. Some people get a little bit thrown off with, they're like, hey, what's the difference between cardiorespiratory endurance and stamina? And the important distinction there is when we're talking about cardiorespiratory endurance, we're referring to oxygen exchange. So think the difference of if I took you to altitude and had you, do some endurance work, and then brought you back down to sea level, you'd have a higher red blood cell count, and be able to feel like you're breathing easier. Where stamina is, we're talking about essentially, now we're talking about metabolic pathways, ATP production, and we're talking about muscular stamina, the ability to recover. If you want to go nerd out, like in like the most insane fashion ever, go back and watch our podcast with Chris Henshaw. Muscular stamina is what we're talking about there. Like the ability to recover, flush lactic acid, contract, relax, and do that repeatedly over time. So that's the distinction between those two, because that does throw people off.
Speaking of altitude, remember Cody in Colorado a couple weeks ago?
How could I forget?
Destroying himself.
Full-blown implosion. 3
straight workouts in a row. So digging a little bit deeper now, I love this part. Is this for me? Because there's a lot of people out there telling coaches, telling trainers, telling people, hey, CrossFit's not for everyone. And that's BS. I mean, how do you tell someone doing functional movements, changing these functional movements up periodically, going relatively intense, like we talked about last week, is not for you? Like, that is what the human body was literally created to do.
Yeah, and so let's give some specific examples here, just so that we can talk about it.
You want to talk about the specific people that are saying this? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, Bob, Sally. We got to talk about your mom. But no, but what I'm referring to is they're like, hey, well, like not everybody needs to overhead squat. Correct, right? That is not necessarily what we would describe as functional, right? Right. The air squat is what we would consider the functional, right? Now, the overhead squat is part of the 9 foundational movements, but that's a different discussion. So don't confuse the foundational movements with functional movements.
Best assessment tool out there, the overhead
squat, right? And the point is simply this: I have members in my gym who will never overhead squat an empty barbell, and that's fine. But the point is, their inability to do so lets me in on a lot of things, right? Overhead position, hip, knee, ankle obstructions, like all that kind of stuff, and allows me to make an assessment about like, what could I be doing? So we would happen to agree with you if you're like, not everybody should overhead squat. Should they be pushing towards the ability to overhead squat? Absolutely. Right. But there is a very real scenario in which they might not overhead squat, which that would be totally appropriate because they physically cannot do so safely. So no, we don't think they should do that. What's a acceptable alternative? Front squat. What if they can't front squat with a barbell? Goblet squat. It's still frontally loaded, forward of the frontal plane, right? In something that will resemble a front rack. So this is when we're talking about, is this for me? The counter arguments for like, hey, it's not for everybody, or a lack of understanding of actual training in most instances, right? They don't know how to actually take this methodology and deliver it to somebody in an appropriate fashion, right? Again, it's not the tool, it's the end user, right? Well, a hammer is good for hammering nails, but if I go around smashing Jay in the head with it, then it's not a good tool.
Well, that may work. But here's what I've been telling a lot of people. I said this at the level 1 this past weekend. Like, if mom can overhead squat, or if mom can do a medicine ball clean, I'm a little less worried about her falling down and getting back up.
I'm not worried at all.
Yeah, at all. With you. Right. If she can put a PVC overhead, get her butt below parallel, and stand back up, I'm like, all right, mom, you're good. Like, I don't have to worry about you falling down. I don't have to worry about wiping your butt, because these movements show me, like we said earlier, best assessment tool. Like, mom can do this.
And some of this is we'll get into program later, but it says the needs of the Olympic athletes differ by degree. It says your needs and the Olympic athletes differ by degree, not kind. And I think that's one of the most succinct ways of saying that. But like, human beings are human beings. Like, my mom still needs to squat, bend over, pick things up, put her hands over her head, get up if she falls down, right? And that's what we're saying. Like, they're chasing competence, where the Matt Frasers, the Justin Medeiros, the Tia Claire, like those are all, that's functional dominance. They're trying to make it all the way to see what the human body can do. But they both need to do the same things by nature of being a human being, right? Like, if we were not in the civilized world that we are today, and we all like lived, in the wild, like, in a third world country where we literally had to sleep out in the wilderness and hunt and do, like, there would be significant problems with inability to do certain things, right? Like run, right? And that's all we're stating. And if they can't do some of those things, that's fine. But we need to come up with alternatives, because there's a difference between like, hey, you shouldn't train like that on a regular basis, and you have zero capacity to do it. And most people in a CrossFit gym might have some sort of restriction where they say Sally can't run, meaning like she shouldn't run a lot because she has, I don't know, a new knee. And the doc's like, hey, just reduce the pounding. I'm like, okay, cool. That makes perfect sense. But that's different than like, if Sally is in an emergent situation and needs to run somewhere, if we know that she can row a 2:15 500-meter row, or give me a 55 RPM sprint on an air assault bike and get 10 calories done in 60 seconds or less, I'm not worried about her ability to solve that problem real time, because she has the overall capacity. And yes, it's still not good for her knee, but guess what? She got herself out of danger. That's the point with regard to all of this.
And it's like Glassman's quote over on the side here on page 8. Significantly improve your 400-meter run, 2,000-meter row, squat, dead, bench, pull up, and dip. Now you are a more formidable being, right? That's it. Like, and I think, first of all, is this a picture of you? Is that you on page 7 doing that box jump, rocking New Balance?
Let me see. Let's see. Yeah, this
That
is.
is
Yeah, I think that was my. I think that was my senior year in college. That's what I felt like my senior year in college.
So, I want to go down to what is an athlete, because this is also where people kind of lose it, where they say, you know, CrossFit's not for everyone, and not everyone should be an athlete. And here's where it says, where do we go here? Can I enjoy optimal health without being an athlete? No. Athletes experience a protection from the ravages of aging and disease that non-athletes never find. For instance, 80-year-old athletes are stronger than non-athletes in their prime at 25 years old. It's one of those scenarios where semantics, right? People are just saying like, well, an 80-year-old,
they're not athletes.
Right. But hey, you're doing CrossFit, you're trying to get better at physical exercise preparedness. You're an athlete. You're trying to get better. You're measuring your scores, your weights. It's okay. One of my very first clients, Sasha, when I started CrossFit, I was like, hey, Sasha, and I referred to him as an athlete. Like all my members were athletes. And he was like, it literally changed his mindset. He was like, oh, I'm an athlete. Like, and it just changed how he approached the gym. It changed what he did outside the walls of the gym, how much sleep he tried to get. Like, that's what an athlete does. And chances are everyone listening, like they put time into that. Like, well, I'm not partying till 3 a.m. when I have to coach at 5 a.m. Like, I'm trying to get a good night's sleep. I'm aware of my food. Those are all athletic endeavors.
Well, also, if we wanted to think at more like a physiological level, like what would be some of the characteristics that an athlete would have, right? So high bone density, decent lean muscle tissue, some degree of coordination and balance, you know, at least a baseline level of the required anatomical end ranges at the joints. So, okay, if I take all of those and I'm like, why would I not want somebody in their late 60s to have those things? And for the record, strong correlates to life expectancy are bone density, grip strength, and lean muscle mass. If you're doing well in those 3 categories, your likelihood of living a longer life goes up exponentially, right? Those 3 things. And if you think about somebody that you know that's like older and fit, they probably have all 3 of those things, right? Because they've been training like an athlete. Doesn't mean they are an athlete if that's where you want to get hung up on the whole discussion. And you would receive the benefits that athletes would receive, which would be the ability to navigate different things like they're referring to. And I think, so with that, like I want to go back up to where it says core, just what is a core strength and conditioning program? Because I think this is important. CrossFit is a core strength and conditioning program in 2 distinct senses. First, we're a core strength and conditioning program in the sense that fitness we develop is foundational to all other athletic needs. So it is now a sport where you could specialize in CrossFit. That's not how it was designed. It was a thought experiment at best, just to see what the human body would be capable of. But it was intended much like the Russians did in late 70s, early 80s, where their programs, before they would take Olympic athletes and funnel them into specific sport programs, everything they did was GPP, or they're always stated as general physical performance. So they would all do gymnastics, they would all do weightlifting, they would all do track and field, right? It was just an earlier version of like, hey, we would want you to be able to do most things, right? So if you have somebody who's a decent decathlete at a young age, it's significantly easier to funnel them into something specific because they have a broad range of skills. And that's the whole premise here. And it says, in the same sense, where are we at here? Sorry. Second, we are a core strength and conditioning program in the literal sense, meaning the center of something. Much of our work focuses on the major functional axis of the human body, the extension and flexion of the hips, torso or trunk. The The primacy of the core strength and conditioning is, in this sense, is supported by the simple observation that powerful hip extension alone is necessary and nearly sufficient for elite athletic performance. So that is, they're like, hey, why is it so kind of frontally plane fixated? Which is like, yes, there's rotational strength or capacity needed to play most sports, I would tell you. But if you're strong at your core, you probably develop that. And that would be sport specific. Like you would get the rotational strength by practicing your sport, swinging your bat, throwing your baseball, kayaking like this is doing. Like that rotational strength would be developed by the nature of playing new sports, like is in the last sentence of World Class Fitness in 100 Words. So it's not that CrossFit's like, hey, it's not necessary. It's like you would develop that outside of the gym. We're here to create the base level that would allow you to have a springboard to go to literally do anything else. And if you want to do rotational, it would literally be a non-issue.
You take anyone who you've helped improve their deadlift, take a golf swing. If you help somebody go from 315 to 405 on their golf swing, on their deadlift, I know they're driving the ball further. I don't know much about golf, but
now,
I know they're hitting that ball
practically speaking, you could run into some issues, right? If you create such a stiff torso that you lose the rotational flexibility required to have the appropriate swing, then you've exceeded the capacity necessary for that. But we're talking about a sport-specific athlete. That's not to say that you shouldn't be stronger. Tiger Woods was at his best when he was stronger than everybody else on the tour, right? Now, did he screw himself up? Absolutely. I don't know anything about his training, but he did have back issues later.
But
that's probably more due to from like incredible sheer forces from rotation of his backswing than anything. So I think it's worth addressing because those are the two components of the program that I don't think should be overlooked and kind of get poo-pooed a little bit. But again, I think it's just lack of understanding. It was never intended to be a sport. It was a thought experiment. It's intended to give you a super broad base to go do whatever you want. And we recommend that, right? It's literally the last statement of World Class Fitness 100 Words is like, go do other stuff.
That's probably one of the biggest downfalls to CrossFit is people get so enamored with their CrossFit training that they don't actually regularly learn and play new sports.
I think everybody, what is it called? I was talking to this about Sarah Wilkinson. There's a term, and I have to go back and look it up. But like once a year, everybody should do something really difficult or really outside your wheelhouse. Like go do something that is
swim the frogman,
right? Like swim the frogman. I was swimming for 3 years, but you should do something that the likelihood of failure is fairly high, just to test what it is that you're doing. And I think that is a lot to what they're speaking to here. Like, how else would you put this whole thing to the test? Well, you would have to take it outside the realm of your specialty. To be like, is this working? And if it's not, well, then you need to go back to the drawing board and evaluate your programming.
I had a client call with Devin from West Virginia, CrossFit Control the other day. And first of all, Cody, I'm an avid cornholer. And he was telling me that every year he rows a marathon row. He's done an ultra with no training. Like, he's a badass. Like, that type of shit is cool. And, we've got a mutual friend, Tosh, who's about to begin rowing. What's he rowing across the Atlantic?
Rowing across the Atlantic Ocean next month.
Yeah. So, I mean, because I think there's value to, we do CrossFit to get physical strength, but I think there's equally as much value in what you get out of it from a mental and emotional strength as well. Yes, and I do play pickleball, Ryan. You're absolutely right. And I happen to be really freaking good at pickleball, if anybody wants to challenge me.
Well, and can you pull that comment over from Brian?
The
Glassman's
pickleball
old lecture. Yeah, no, nobody cares about pickleball. My mom could probably beat you. Glassman, his old lecture talks about how CrossFit helps us be ready for the unknown game time. A similar LEO, military firefighters versus athlete. What's your game day? Most of us don't have a game day anymore. Your game day is like some terrible shit happens on a Tuesday that you weren't expecting. Will you be prepared to deal with that is really the question at hand for most people. And I've said this before, but your average CrossFitter walking around in the gym, extracted from the gym and then placed somewhere in the real world is probably far more capable than anybody else within eyeshot.
Even like think about your affiliate, like the least fit person there, as long as they've been coming in for a few months and they've gained some capacity and understanding of movements, they are probably so much more prepared for life than anyone else on the street.
Right. And that was the expressed stated goal from the outset.
This gets me angry because of the people saying CrossFit's not for everyone.
So there should be addressed, right? It's just like everybody can do it. It is not for everyone. Simply for
it's like this. Pickleball.
Right. Well, that's just not for people who
who
have no coordination, accuracy, agility, balance. But no, CrossFit in and of itself is going to be far more difficult for people mentally in some instances than it will be physically. Right? It's not for people who have not been physically tested before, who struggle with things that are hard, because CrossFit is hard. It's hard physically, it's hard emotionally, so depending on what your starting point is, to deal with your inability to do things, or maybe a smaller person in stature, or a female beats you if you're a guy, but like just things like that require the ego to be set aside. Right? So it's not just working out, because there's nothing super challenging about going to the gym and doing curls, right? Not bashing curls, but like there was nothing hard about that style of training.
But and I think a lot of the times CrossFit does become overwhelming. It's because you're putting too much pressure on yourself about it. Like if you treated it like, hey, we're not going to start the clock today. Like you do this at Rife every so often, right? Moving days. Mm-hmm. And it's like, hey, we're not going to start the clock today. We're working out. We're having fun. And all of a sudden they're like, oh, okay, I can do that. It's an AMRAP. We're all going to finish at the same time.
Yeah, and I think that is, yes, there are a certain amount of people that put pressure on themselves, but that's a cultural thing inside the box, because you go to certain boxes where nobody feels that way. And it's because of the culture that they've bred there. How they express the stated intent of the workout is supposed to be executed that day. How the coach scales people. How they acknowledge, good behavior or good decision making. Like those kind of pitfalls, or those darts that people throw at CrossFit, those are coaching errors. Right? That's what they are. They're coaching errors. It's either lack of understanding in the program, or lack of leadership, or lack of understanding about how to guide somebody through this process. And it's not easy, right? Like that, we should just state that right now. Like coaching really well or how to at a high level is not easy. If it were, everybody would do it. And if you think you're great at it, turn the camera on, put it on the internet, and let everybody take a look at it.
That's what I think the biggest reason people say CrossFit's not for everyone is they're not capable of coaching everyone. Like you can't handle grandma, mom, and Division I athlete in the same class. Where once you get the ability to do that, you realize, oh, I can, not only can I do this, I should be doing this. Before we go to anaerobic versus aerobic, I think this is a cool sentence. If we go down to fringe athletes, the triathlete, cyclist, and marathoner are often regarded as among the fittest athletes on earth. Nothing could be further from the truth. The endurance athlete has trained long past any cardiovascular health benefit and has lost ground in strength, speed, and power. Typically does nothing for coordination, agility, balance, and accuracy, and possesses little more than average flexibility. I love how even in 2002, Glassman's just like, shots fired. Like, you all are dumb. We got something really special here.
Well, to some extent, it's nobody's fault. Like, I don't think anybody was just like, hey, let's come up with a really poor definition of fitness. Like, I don't think anybody was like, to set out that to be the goal, because the definition of fit before CrossFit or Greg Glassman was like the state of being fit, right? Like, what does that even mean? It's like, he's like, you've heard the definition of a circular argument? Like, it's like, well, how are you fit? Or it's like the state of being fit. What does that mean? It's just like, well, you can do some things, right? But if we're talking about that, well, when you define it poorly, you get bad measurements, right? So it's not what they were trying to be like. It's not that those people do not have some level of fitness. It's just not well-rounded, because the only thing people were really tracking at that point, for the most part, was VO2 max. It was either you were an athlete, you did some degree of like powerlifting or bodybuilding, or you were like a long, slow endurance athlete. You know, and then not that bodybuilding doesn't have any degree of athleticism, but it kind of doesn't, right? That's not what it's intended for. It's purely based on aesthetics, which is fine, right? But that doesn't mean you're athletic. It's not going to help you develop athleticism. So I don't know. I think that's just a poor definition. At which point it was like people didn't know any better. They're like, oh, these people are fit. This is what you go do to be fit. You can run for a bike for a long time. And it's like, all right, well, what if you were, which is weird, right? Because they're the people that everybody admire, like the elite level athletes, the baseball players, the football players, the basketball players. And you're like, those are athletes, like legit elite level athletes that can do a wide range of things like jump, run, sprint, throw, kick, punch, change direction rapidly, but they train like athletes. And I think that was one of the statements earlier is like, and that's what CrossFit changed, is that like it brought training like an athlete, or it brought training for output or outcome to the masses, not just training for looks. Now, the plus is form follows function, which is like
you get the looks.
You get the looks if you train like an athlete. It tends to come with it.
You get to have more fun, and I would argue you get better aesthetics. I mean,
well, that's subjective, right? Like if we're going to be very honest with you, like what do you want?
Sure, but certainly more functional, right? Not display model only out there, right? You see what men and women alike just looking awesome from doing CrossFit.
Yeah, and it's not to say you can't look awesome doing other things. And if that's all you care about, then listen, I'm here for you, and I will be your biggest cheerleader. But most people would be better served to live longer, healthier, more functional lives if they chased output and outcome versus just looks. Because in one scenario you can't have both, in the other scenario you can have both.
Before we dive into aerobic and anaerobic training, let's have a quick word from our sponsors, would you, Cody? Hey guys, real quick, we just wanted to share a video from one of our amazing Affiliate U clients. Fern and I, along with the Best Hour team, have been able to help hundreds of affiliate owners and thousands of coaches level up and create successful businesses. And stories like this are the reason why we do it.
My name is Kate Schultz, and I am the owner of CrossFit ELC. In January of 2022, we started really looking for mentorship within our business. The adversity that COVID had created, what we were doing before couldn't withstand that adversity. We were winging it. And as Fern would say, passion has a shelf life, and we felt that at CrossFit ELC, and our passion was still there, but it was dwindling because we didn't have systems. We didn't have the other side of that scale of we are passionate and we love helping people, and this is how we do that. We were missing that piece. That's where Affiliate U came in and really changed the game for us. We were burnt out as coaches. I am a young mom, so I have two kids under 2, and running an affiliate and managing coaches and members and all of that. I had no systems in place to set me up for success in that, and I didn't have systems in place to set my coaches and my members up for success in doing that. And so Affiliate U has really bridged that gap for us and has given us the opportunity to build in systems into our affiliate in a way that works for us and in a way that puts us in a direction of success and growth for all involved. And that's been really exciting.
Look at us, professional.
That's a little weird because you're like, are our sponsors us?
Yeah, we sponsor ourselves. Oh. If you don't believe in yourself, who will?
Does that make us unsponsorable or sponsorable?
It makes us extremely sponsorable. And if you're listening and want to take your business to the next level, you want a commercial in here, reach out to us. So let's dig in, aerobic and anaerobic.
You want me to do you want to carry the water here as usual? How do you want to do this?
Yeah, take it. I'm not familiar with this.
Yeah, you should be. No, so this is a little insight into part of the What is Fitness lecture with regard to the metabolic pathways. So there are three, kind of read this here. There are three main energy systems that fuel all human activity. Almost all changes occur in the body due to exercise that are related to demands placed on these energy systems. Furthermore, the efficacy of any given fitness regimen may largely be tied to its ability to elicit an adequate stimulus for change within these three energy systems. So what we're talking about is the metabolic pathways, right? Or, this kind of ties into what Chris Henshaw was saying, is like, this is the ability to recover and do activity repetitively. So the three main are the phosphocreatine, the glycolytic, and the oxidative. And those are based on like percentage of output. What's this say in the comments?
Ryan's making a joke. It's a write-off.
Oh, it's a write-off. I'm like, I hate you, Ryan. Don't ever use that term again. But this is something where it's just like, this one is one where you can get into the weeds, but you need to understand like baseline level understanding of these two, of why these things are important, because of the benefits you would get from both aerobic and anaerobic style training. So think aerobic with oxygen, anaerobic without oxygen, required to produce adenosine triphosphate, which is the energy currency within the body. You want to do something, anything, you want to make a fist, you want to slap Jay across the face, like you want to squat down and pick up your kids, ATP is the requirement for that. So your body can produce it, or you can get it via food, but that's what we're referring to when we're talking about aerobic versus anaerobic.
Yeah, and there's a reason, when you talk about the three pathways, and there's more pathways for the record, but the three that we speak about during What is Fitness, like for instance, phosphagen, glycolytic, and oxidative, we tend to live in that glycolytic world because of the bleed over to both others. And we use the example of an 800-meter runner has bleed over to both very short distances, but also longer distances, such as a 2-mile or 5K. So in CrossFit, we want that.
and then why they would be valuable, and it's just understanding when you're looking at programming.
That's good. That was good. Stay tuned to the dropping in episodes in Colorado when you want to see.
Yeah, he's down. Cody, I'm the only one that can make Jewish jokes. Because technically Jay and I are partners, and you're not in there, so it makes it okay. No, but the reason that it's important is from a programming standpoint is like training in those different within those different capacities or energy systems they elicit different responses. If we're talking anaerobic, we're talking like very short duration, which is typically lending itself to, higher bone density, muscle growth, things of that nature. But now once I bridge the gap and I move, kind of out past this 2-minute mark, and it's now becomes, by definition, if you will, aerobic, and oxygen is required for this. Now we're looking at things like fat loss, more cardiorespiratory endurance. So those things, and understanding like how I would program those types of things into any sort of training program to get the desired outcome is important. And that's honestly, that's about all you need to know about it. Like, you don't need to go that much further in it for the vast majority of people. Right now, if you want to nerd out in it, there's textbooks, hundreds of pages long. And, if you really want to dive into this, I suggest that you do that. There is an immense amount to be had there. But for the purposes of the lay person and somebody who's just getting into this, that's about as far as you need to wade into the water before you find yourself in trouble and then have like veered off into no man's land and are doing things that are wacky.
Let me ask you this question, Ferdin. Did CrossFit save weightlifting?
I mean, it's a hypothetical, and it would, like, nobody really knows the answer to that. It's like,
how many people that are currently doing CrossFit without it would have ever done a clean and jerk or a snatch?
Very few.
Very few. Right. And then
the answer is like probably yes. I know Coach B's said before that is absolutely the case. I believe it to be true. I also think it doesn't matter. It saved it, so who cares?
He's so what's the word, Cody?
Politically correct.
Somebody
politically
drop
correct
a word.
is that's how I've been referred to, as politically correct.
The guy making I'm the politically incorrect one these days.
I withheld a comment about vaccines earlier, so you're welcome. Yeah.
On this call, we were talking, and
like about 20 seconds ago. Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
I was gonna loop it in there.
All right, so we've got the Olympic lifts. Cool. Clean and jerk, snatch. Towards the bottom, numerous studies have demonstrated the Olympic lift's unique capacity to develop strength, muscle, power, speed, coordination, vertical leap, muscular endurance, bone strength, and the physical capacity to withstand stress. And I think, when we talk about the Olympic lifts, going back to the 10 skills you mentioned earlier, they're there, right? Throw in 30 in a row, call it Isabel, call it Grace, and you got cardiorespiratory endurance.
I think what's important about this is, like, when we're talking about that series of what we call those, like, adaptations or advantages that you would get from that, is if we think about the most potent athletic endeavors, right? Think about the most athletic person that you've ever seen do anything, right? It will very likely
me playing pickleball is what I thought about.
You playing Nintendo Wii, yeah. The
little tennis, tennis on the Wii.
It probably involves, it probably involves these two things: rapid hip extension followed by a rapid change of direction of the hip, right? So if you think change of direction in sprinting or jumping or serving a volleyball or tennis ball, you name any number, like almost every track and field sport, throwing, sprinting, jumping.
Yeah, anything that requires jumping, really.
Right. The Olympic lifts are really unique in their ability to highlight that specific action at the hip, the rapid opening and closing of the hip extension, for violence, and then for rapid change of direction for position, is where the Olympic lifts are unmatched. Triple jump.
Yeah. We all know Katie is spectacular. Those are Hinshaw's words, not mine.
Correct. So that's what I think is cool about the Olympic lifts, is like it's very hard to replicate some of those kind of like sport specific type movements, but the Olympic lifts are fantastic at them. You know, if you think of like blocking or tackling inside of rugby or football. Yeah, you're playing it wrong. Rugby or football. Like at the crux of that, you're talking about triple extension of those two like sport interactions, which is like rapid extension of the hip, like to the extreme, violence, essentially.
Well, if you want to be violent, you need to be able to do that. I mean, if you're in a fight, that's what it is, right? I mean, it's
we hadn't even go there, like wrestling, jujitsu, like again, it's hip extension.
When I watch people that are doing jujitsu and they talk about like CrossFit's this or that, I'm like, if I literally just turned you this direction, you'd be doing CrossFit. You're just on your back, right? But like you'd be doing CrossFit, you're just doing it from guard. Oh, it is extraordinary. I misspoke. Do you think Katie has that clip saved somewhere and she plays it pretty regularly?
She has one of those picture frames that's live that just plays it on repeat. Yeah.
It's her screensaver.
It's on her desk.
Yeah. For those that don't know, go check out the Dropping In at CrossFit Mayhem, where we hung out with Hinshaw for like 8 hours, and Katie very much impressed him. He referred to her as extraordinary. So let me ask you this. Did CrossFit save gymnastics?
I would not go that far, because I think
not that it doesn't matter, like weightlifting. You just wouldn't go that far.
No. I think it's exposed people to gymnastics, but CrossFit or the I'm not gonna put this on CrossFit specifically. I'm gonna say like CrossFit athletes at large have not made nearly the degree of gains in gymnastics that they have in weightlifting. And what I mean by that is like,
you think that's true?
Well, I mean, we could just use some very specific examples, which is like there have been CrossFit athletes, and again, who have made the Olympic weightlifting team. Right. Meaning like
I get where you're going.
They're towards the upper end of that, which is like, you would be really hard pressed to find any large conglomerate of CrossFit athletes that would possess even a handful of rudimentary gymnastic skills outside of like walking on their hands and doing a strict muscle up. Like that's pretty much where it ends. And those are in most instances not even considered movements in gymnastics. They would be how do you transition to something else.
Yeah.
Like how you get on the rings.
Well, and I think that was what was really impressive about this year's CrossFit Games, right? Boz brought it back. He did things like the parallel bars. He did a pirouette, continued handstand walking. So he is bringing, I do think you're right about the fact that there are CrossFitters that can literally compete in weightlifting at the Olympic level. I would argue that's just a matter of how vast gymnastics. Like weightlifting, you get good at two things. Gymnastics, it's like,
well, no, that's not true.
Different...
Like you get good at two lifts, but those two lifts it require a lot, right? Like pulling, squatting, going overhead, speed. Like there's a lot going on there. But I hear what you're saying. But yes, the range in gymnastics is far wider, right? Which is why, going back to kind of what I mentioned earlier, we're going back to kind of like the Eastern Bloc countries with regard to early 80s, late 70s training. Like they were all starting with the baseline level of gymnastics, because why wouldn't you?
Yeah, and Ryan does bring up a good point in the comments. You can manipulate the external load when it comes to the barbell, harder to do when it comes to gymnastic movements. So the barbell is easier to scale.
It's easier to scale. It's also, there are certain body types that really do not lend themselves, that not only don't lend themselves well to gymnastics, they put you at severe disadvantage with regard to physics and levers. Which is like, if you are a long athlete, everything is going to be harder for you versus being short, right? That's just physics, which is why you don't have any tall gymnasts. Tall relative, but not tall gymnasts. They're not a thing.
That Federico brings up a good point in the comments, though. Spotting is the PVC of gymnastics, right? Like you don't see a lot of that happening at the affiliate level. And have you taken the gymnastics seminar?
The old one. I'm taking the new one because we're hosting it here. Shout out to the gymnastics crew. We're hosting here at CrossFit Rife. We're hosting, I believe, in February and March. I don't remember the exact dates, but if you're interested, both the powerlifting and the gymnastics seminars here at CrossFit Rife in February and March. I believe we're hosting like a level 2 and then those two like all within about a 60-day span.
Nice. You can get your level 2 and 2 nice credentials. But yeah, I think, when you take that, there's a ton of spotting that goes on, from tucks to L-sits to levers. And I don't think we incorporate that very often at the gym.
Yeah. And I agree with you, Federico, about the spotting. The issue is like spotting, the PVC pipe you can practice by yourself. Spotting requires another human being, and it can get a little dicey if you don't have somebody to kind of help you out with that. Like if you've never spent any time, like in around gymnasts, like on the mat, just like playing around with stuff, and like they teach you how to spot, like teaching how people to do backflips and stuff like that. It can be a little awkward and potentially a little creepy if you don't know what you're doing. There's a reason for that. So there's a much steeper learning curve to learn to spot appropriately, versus just like, here's a PVC pipe you can practice on your own and like look in a mirror. Yeah,
true. It's a whole lot easier. Let's continue scrolling down to routines. Let me read this. Any routine, no matter how complete, contains within it omissions, the parameters for which there will be no adaptation. The breadth of adaptation will exactly match the breadth of the stimulus. For this reason, CrossFit embraces short, middle, and long distance metabolic conditioning and low, moderate, and heavy load assignment. We talked a little bit about this last week, but that's
otherwise stated everything.
Yeah, we do everything, and no matter how complete you think your programming is, there's a workout that's going to challenge you.
I mean, it should.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of the whole point of it, is like, most people do not train and with that breadth of stimulus, because as a youth, you would start with what would look like play, which would be analogous to GPP, right? Just go out into the playground and make up your own sports and play on the monkey bars and, and wrestle. And it's just like that, in and of itself is GPP. Like, just go out there and just do stuff. And then at some point you would pick a sport, right? So I would start to specialize in a specific sport, because that's the nature of at least in the US and probably most places of adolescence. When you move into, grade school, secondary school, high school, is that you, in many instances, will choose a sport to participate in, at which point I go from doing a lot of things to doing a few things, at which point I would lose some capacity.
When CrossFit posted Fitness in 100 Words back a few months, people lost their mind about no sugar. And then they lost their mind, surprisingly, about routine is the enemy. And people were like, linear progressions and this and that. And it's like, that's where a lot of people misconstrue the difference between variance and random. This is not random. This is not the hopper. There are linear progressions. There is periodization if you wanted to when it comes to CrossFit.
Yeah, Cody, can you pull up the definition of random so that we can just air this out right now? But yeah, again, that's the point. I think the challenge there is to balance this idea of not adhering to strict rules and structure versus just doing it off of the cuff. And I think the solution there, drum roll, is practice. It takes practice, right? So made, done, happening, or chosen without method or conscious decision, right? So we're definitely not suggesting that you would program in that fashion. Can you pull up the definition of a variance, please, Cody? I think that's just that it takes practice. It says the fact or quality of being different, divergent, or inconsistent. The state or fact of, what does that say? Disagreeing. No, not quarreling. So probably that first one. So very different definitions. And when you look at it that way, because again, big on defining our terms, like let's define random and variance, right? Those are two totally different things. And basically you're just looking at be like the quality of being inconsistent with regard to doing the same thing over and over and over, right? And there was an old article written by, you remember when I don't know, when we could talk about it because they're both not in the organization anymore, the Russells, when they wrote the blog, there was actually, you might be able to pull that up, Cody. There was an old article in there when like I forget who the person giving the lecture was, but he was talking about periodization inside of CrossFit, and he was not a CrossFitter per se, but he was talking about like to some degree why periodization, I don't remember the exact words, but he was saying, in effect, he was saying it doesn't work inside of CrossFit because of the interfering training modalities, right? But what he's saying is just like they don't work the way they traditionally work. Going back to what I was stating earlier, is like the reason people are saying it doesn't work is because you have to zoom out significantly to see the adaptation that you were looking for. It's not like on a 12-week cycle anymore. It's now like a 36-month cycle, and nobody really looks at training that way for the most part. So I gotta go see if that, I don't even know if that website's even live anymore.
Yeah, that was pretty popular back in the day. All right, we've got a few topics we still want to get to as we begin.
And if you guys have questions, put those in here. Otherwise, it's just us blabbering. Don't ask me about question 158 on the level 3 because I literally don't know.
I'll tell you the answer. It's B. All right. Neuroendocrine adaptation. And this is what's unique to functional movements, right? We say in here earlier, we faulted isolation movements as being ineffectual. Now we can tell you that one of the critical elements missing from these movements is that they invoke essentially no neuroendocrine response. And I always tell people, like, do you ever squat on Monday and like Thursday, you're like, man, I think I've got mono. Like, I'm tired. Like, that's typically like that CNS response.
There's another one that's specific to guys, but it's just like, if you like deadlift heavy on one day, the next couple mornings, you should like, there will typically be a trend there when you wake up. Let me see what else we got here. I mean, one of the big ones is like things like heavy, like squatting and deadlifting. Like this is just well known, known to increase testosterone production. Right.
Yeah.
Now,
because of that response you get.
Right. And I think, and that's important too, is because like if we're talking, so neuroendocrine, just think like the brain's ability to manipulate the endocrine system, right? And how all of that works, right? So endocrine system manages all the hormones in the human body, right? So anything you want is essentially like that. It's a series of interactions, and anybody that's an endocrinologist, a doctor, like, bear with me. This is a very rudimentary explanation of this, and I'm happy to be corrected on any of this, by the way. The whole system is run on hormones. Like the hormone creates a chemical reaction that leads to A, which leads to B, which leads to C, yada, yada, yada. So absent of that, you would essentially really never get the overall adaptation that you were looking for, right? And this is why it's important that the movements and the things that we're doing have to specifically elicit that response. And this is probably a safe assumption too, is that it's probably not accurate that they have no neuroendocrine response, but it'd probably be a safe assumption to say that similar to power output, relative to non-functional counterparts, the output is wildly different.
Right. Doing lateral raises probably has some neuroendocrine response. It's just nothing compared to squatting or deadlifting.
Right. We can maybe loop in Dr. Jenkins here to nerd out on some of these at a more, like, we just bring on an actual doctor and not somebody who says he's a doctor.
Some say I'm a doctor. So
right.
if you have anything
some
you
people
need
being,
clarified,
you know,
I can do that for you.
Yeah. If you want to send them pictures about that rash, feel free to send them those pictures.
Send them right to me. Power is defined as the time rate of doing work. And, you know, we talk about power, obviously, right in the beginning of your level 1. What is CrossFit? Force times distance over time equals power. We define intensity as exactly equal to power. And functional movements have the ability to move large loads, long distances quickly, which then increases power output.
Which leads to
results.
Whatever results you're looking for.
Yeah. Where do we want these results? Everywhere.
So going back to
that. And I think that's really important, because you don't need to do the math every time you work out. Well, I did pull-ups or I did thrusters, but just know that by tracking your workouts, you do a workout like Fran back in 2007, hopefully by 2008, your time's a little bit lower, or your scaling is a little bit more challenging for you. So the goal is that we're increasing our power output. Like we said, power equals intensity, intensity equals the results. And then through proper variance, like we just talked about, you're going to get those results everywhere. Let's bring it down to diet, because I think there's
Hold on. I want to read this last sentence because I think this is important. Increasing your ability to produce power is necessary and nearly sufficient to elite athleticism. Additionally, power is the definition of intensity, which in turn has been linked to nearly every positive aspect of fitness, going back to the, intensity is the independent variable statement that we always use. Increases in strength, performance, muscle mass, and bone density are all arise in proportion to the intensity of exercise, right? So again, going back to like, hey, if you want results, what result would you be looking for? I would like to have higher bone density. Cool. You need to lift heavier weights. Heavy's relative. I would like to have, better muscle mass. Okay. Probably need to lift a higher volume of weights and lift heavier. I want to have better cardiorespiratory endurance. Okay. Probably you need to run longer and mix that in with some sprints. But like all of those can be mathematically identified as an increase in your intensity via power output. And that's the whole purpose of that. It's just like, if you change the variables that you put in, you would obviously change the output that you would get.
So let's wrap this up by talking about diet. Let's talk about nutrition, because this is one of the first times, an exercise routine, a methodology, put diet into the equation. We're like, hey, we need to talk about diet if we're going to talk about fitness and we're going to talk about becoming healthier. I mean, it's pretty straightforward.
Well, go ahead, Mr. Own Your Eating.
Well, reading
man.
these 3 bullet points, protein should be lean and varied and account for about 30% of your total caloric load. Carbohydrates should be predominantly low glycemic and account for about 40% of your total caloric load. Fat should be from whole food sources and account for about 30% of your. I mean, that's it. 40, 30, 30. Then they go into some ways on, how we can figure it out. But it's relatively simple. And for many of us that started back in the day, we did the zone. Did you ever do the zone?
Oh yeah, that was the first diet I ever did.
Like ever?
Mm-hmm.
Throughout Division I basketball, no diet?
No, there's no diet. Oh. Bro, I would be crushing full pizzas, quarts of ice cream. At that age, typically with that level of, you have a couple things going for you. So one is just, like in some instances, like genetics can just help you out, right? Like you either have a propensity to put on weight or you don't, right? And I did not. But if you think about a college athlete, the number of training sessions per week, and then you factor in a college athlete for me specifically, at Service Academy with regard to the rigors of like the daily requirements to operate, like calories was the name of the game. Like you could just eat shitty food and you would probably look just fine. You probably actually look really good, but it was just calories. Like you just needed to eat to continue to be able to function throughout the day because of the number of physical requirements that you would be faced with on it. Like, so on an average week, I can't remember about this, but it was probably something to the tune of 15 to 17 different training sessions throughout the week during a preseason setting. So it's like, who gives a shit what you eat?
Yeah.
You just need 4,000 calories. Yeah. You just need 4,000 calories in your body to continue moving.
Pancakes it is. Hey, those watching, who's done the zone? Let us know. And do you have any specific questions about the zone? I think the zone, even at the level 1 nutrition lecture, it's not getting phased out, if you will. It's still probably the diet we speak the most about, but I do think less and less people are doing it and getting educated on it.
Well, I can speak to that specifically with regard to like it. So it's not removed. It's just no longer the forefront or the focus of that lecture. We talk about a whole number of different protocols in there: keto, macro. If you want to throw RP in there, what else? The zone, intermittent fasting. All have they have typically a handful of outcomes that they're addressing. Some sort of caloric restriction, and controlling of insulin. Right. That's really what they're all targeting in different type of.
Basically keeping carbohydrates in check.
Right. And the reason it's in there is because the reason we keep the zone in there is not because it's necessarily the best or that's the one that it's just the one that like we have the most experience with because it was what people have started doing early on. Right.
Yeah. And
had that change and been something else, it probably would be that at this point, but it just wasn't.
And I would say, macros is a little bit easier than the zone, but just because it's easier doesn't mean it's better. There's a lot to be gained by doing the zone versus macros. And you could do both for the record, but specifically making sure you're keeping your insulin response in check by eating all of your meals in that 40-30-30 ratio, where macros, if you're anything like me, you just load up on your carbs at the end of the day. And I don't care. I think you can probably mitigate that insulin response because maybe you're fasted or maybe, you're just pumping out glucagon from not eating carbs. But at the same time, it's probably not the best thing for you to smash 100 grams of carbs by themselves at the end of the day.
And this is where I think with regard to nutrition in general, understanding principle over specific practice is what's important, because we could line up any number of scenarios where like any one of those that we know to be effective in a lot of instances would be ineffective because of, relationship with food, general habits, the ability to resist urges or temptation, like all that kind of stuff, right? Like all of those will factor in. So some of them are like, hey, the zone teaches you a handful of things. It's like, it's a little bit more specific on like why they do it that way with regard to insulin response and having some sort of balance with regard to that. But you could do macros or you could do any of those other ones, but there will be in a lot of instances some introduction of poor behavior that's kind of weirdly mitigated by the overall macro control. It's kind of what you were alluding to before, which is like, yeah, I don't necessarily think you should smash, 400 grams of carbohydrates for dinner, but does it fall within your macros? Yeah. Could you get away with that for a while? Probably. Is it long-term good behavior? Arguably not.
I also think nutrition is one of those things where we look at the games athletes, Danny Spiegel notoriously talked about crumble cookie, or, seeing Rich Froning. Remember back in the day, Rich Froning was smashing peanut butter and milk on his documentary.
But that kind of goes back to, I mean, like we could use Michael Phelps, for example, who was eating 10,000 calories a day when he was swimming in the Olympics, but he's burning, I don't know what the number was, but something insane. Like
when he's in water all day, which they say
just burns calories in general, just trying to keep your body warmer or trying to keep your body up. But their context, right? Like she's probably doing multiple, like pretty rigorous training sessions per day.
She's probably lifting way heavier than anyone listening.
Right. And the same thing with Rich back in the day. Like he was kind of the first one that really like dialed up the volume, and then he was like, he just eats like that. And he's like, you're right. Just like, and again, genetics, like that dude's genetically gifted with regard to his physique. Like we should be okay saying that. Like that is a thing.
And also I think you hear her say something like that, or you see Rich talk about that, and we assume it's like, that's all
the time.
Right. And in reality, it's like, maybe she has 2 crumble cookies a week.
Right.
And she, like you said about Phelps, she's burning way more. She's way stronger. She's lifting heavy. So it's okay. You don't need crumble. For the record, crumble cookie is delicious.
And I mean, if we're really going to get the nuts and bolts of this, like if the requirement for carbohydrate intake, if in fact that's what we're going to be, that's kind of like the fuel source that we're going to be using, like carb versus fat adaptive, to fuel that level of output on a repeat basis, the reality of that is like it is going to be nearly impossible to get what is required via high quality foods.
Unless, you're going to crush some rice, crush some sweet potato, probably some nut butters, but even then you're talking 500, 600, 800 calories, not 800 calories per cookie.
Right.
Which goes down a whole lot easier than 500 grams of sweet potato.
Yeah. So I think there's just context there. It doesn't mean that like that's the way that you should go. And anytime you're referring to like somebody who's on the end of the spectrum as like, this is best practice for the masses, I think we've gone down the wrong path, regardless of what it is that we're referring to.
Well, we did it. We covered foundations. We covered all the pages. We helped these people learn a little bit. And Cody, do we have Pat Barber? Is that next week? Pat Barber is coming on next week. We're going to have 2 straight episodes with Pat. And I know he's expecting his 4th child any day. So there's a chance he doesn't hop on. But assuming the newest Barber child comes out when expected, he will be on this coming Wednesday, a week from today, as well as the week after. We're going to go over what is fitness part 1, as well as what is fitness part 2. We're going to break that down. So as always, make sure you're following our Instagram, our social media, best hour of their day, because Cody always posts what you need to be reading and a reminder for you guys. And if you enjoyed this episode, please share it, like it, follow it, subscribe it. What else can they do? What's another verb?
Follow.
Follow.
Engage.
engage with us.
Tag.
Yeah, we want to. Man, you're good. You are good.
Repost.
He's still going. Still going. But this was great. This was fantastic. I'm learning every week. I hope you guys are learning, and we will see you again next Wednesday. Same YouTube channel, same time, same Fern.